blood and spilled espresso smell remarkably similar when they hit Italian marble. Fiona knew this fact intimately. She had spent 3 years surviving the humid, unforgiving slums of Mumbai learning languages most people in her city couldn't place on a map. Now she poured coffee for men who tipped in $100 bills and veiled threats. When a notorious crime boss decided to use a foreign tongue to strip away her dignity, he didn't realize he was speaking her language. High-end dining is just a theater of the absurd for people with too much money and too little conscience. Aurelia's was the kind of restaurant that didn't print prices on the menu. The lighting was permanently dimmed to a golden sepia-toned hue that made the women look younger and the men look less dangerous. The air smelled of white truffles, aged leather, and the quiet, desperate sweat of a waitstaff pushed to the absolute brink of human endurance. Fiona adjusted her black tie in the reflection of the espresso machine. Her feet throbbed in time with her heartbeat. 12 hours into a double shift, the pain in her arches had moved past a dull ache and settled into a sharp, grinding reality. She didn't mind it. Pain was grounding. It meant you were still on your feet. It meant you were still alive. Table 4 needs a clear and Table 7 is asking for the sommelier, Simon hissed, blowing past her with a tray of half-eaten wagyu. Simon was the floor manager, a man whose entire existence was defined by a perpetual state of controlled panic. And look alive, Hayes. The Gallagher party just pulled up to the valet. Fiona's stomach gave a quiet, involuntary tighten. Arthur Gallagher. He wasn't a cartoon mobster. He didn't wear pinstripe suits or chew on cigars, and he didn't scream at his subordinates. In the modern era, organized crime wore tailored navy suits from Savile Row, carried hedge fund portfolios, and spoke in the quiet, measured tones of a corporate board meeting. Gallagher owned shipping lanes. He owned real estate. He owned, according to the whispers in the break room, at least 3 city councilmen and a judge. When Arthur Gallagher walked into a room, the room changed. It wasn't a sudden silence. It was a shift in barometric pressure. Fiona grabbed her service tray and pushed through the swinging kitchen doors just in time to see the front entrance open. Gallagher stepped inside. He was a tall man, early 40s, with hair starting to grey at the temples and eyes the colour of wet slate. He didn't look around to see who was watching him. He didn't need to. He knew everyone was. Behind him trailed his shadow 3 men. 2 of them, Wyatt and Cole, were built like brick walls, draped in expensive wool, their eyes scanning the room with the mechanical precision of security cameras. The third was Gideon, a leaner, older man with a pockmarked face, who acted as Gallagher's primary fixer and international liaison. Simon was practically bowing as he led them to the corner booth. The power booth. It offered a full view of the room and an impenetrable wall to their backs. Fiona. Simon materialized beside her, his fingers digging into her forearm. "You're on the Gallagher table." "I'm covering the patio," she replied flatly, keeping her eyes on the floor. "Not anymore. Jenna is shaking so hard she just dropped a water glass in the service station. I need someone who doesn't look like they're about to wet themselves. Go. Standard protocol. Speak only when spoken to. Do not look them directly in the eye unless they address you." Fiona pulled her arm out of his grip. She didn't feel fear not the way Jenna did. Fear was a luxury for people who still had something left to lose. Fiona had lost everything worth keeping 5 years ago in a city 8,000 miles away. She picked up a fresh linen cloth, a silver water pitcher glistening with condensation, and walked toward the corner booth. Her posture was perfect. Her face was a mask of pleasant professional nothingness. As she approached, the low murmur of their conversation reached her. Gallagher was leaning back against the leather upholstery, a casual elegance to his posture that completely contradicted the brutal nature of his reputation. He was looking at Gideon. Fiona stepped up to the table. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Aurelia's. May I start you off with some sparkling or still water? Gallagher didn't even look at her. He just raised 2 fingers. Still. Fiona moved smoothly, pouring the water into his crystal glass, without a sound, the ice clinking softly. She moved to Gideon, then to the 2 heavy hitters. The men completely ignored her presence, treating her with the absolute invisibility afforded to the working class in rooms like this. She was a piece of furniture that happened to pour water. The customs officials in Mumbai are holding the containers. Gideon was saying, his voice a low gravel. They want a higher percentage. The new Port Authority chief is trying to make a name for himself. Fiona's hand hesitated for a fraction of a millisecond. Mumbai. The name of the city sent a phantom heat across her skin. She could almost smell the roasting peanuts, the exhaust of the auto-rickshaws, the heavy, suffocating scent of the Arabian Sea at low tide. She shoved the memory down, locking it in the dark box in her chest where it belonged. He wants a higher percentage, Gallagher asked quietly. He finally picked up his water glass. Does he know whose containers those are? He knows. He doesn't care. He says he needs a show of good faith. 30% bump on the tariff or the crates get inspected. Gallagher took a sip of water. His eyes drifted away from Gideon and landed on Fiona. Fiona stood perfectly still, her service tray held lightly at her side. She met his gaze for a second, then respectfully lowered her eyes to the center of the table, exactly as she had been trained. Gallagher's lips twitched into a faint, cruel smile. He set his glass down. When he spoke next, the smooth, unaccented English was gone. "Ye log sochte hain ki hum inke isharon par nachenge," Gallagher said. "These people think we will dance to their tunes." The words hit Fiona's ears like a physical blow. The accent was harsh, slightly clipped a foreigner's approximation of the language, but the vocabulary was perfectly clear. It was Hindi. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. Years of waiting tables and surviving the streets of Dharavi had taught her the absolute necessity of a blank face. She kept her eyes focused on the empty bread plate in front of Cole. Gideon chuckled a dry, raspy sound. He replied in the same language. "Naya aadmi hai, apni auqat nahi janta." He is a new man. He doesn't know his status/place. Fiona calmly pulled out her notepad. "Have we decided on appetizers, gentlemen? Or would you like a few more minutes with the menu?" Gallagher stared at her. The amusement in his eyes deepened. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, entering her personal space. He looked at Gideon, but he pointed a perfectly manicured finger right at Fiona's apron. "Dekho is gori ko," Gallagher said, in Hindi, his voice conversational as if he were discussing the weather. "Look at this white girl. Kitni खोखली लग रही है, जैसे इसके दिमाग में एक भी विचार ना हो. How hollow she looks, like there isn't a single thought in her head." Gideon smirked, glancing up at Fiona. "यह यहाँ की नौकरानियां हैं, आर्थर. इनका काम सिर्फ मुस्कुराना और झुकना है." "These are the servants here, Arthur. Their job is only to smile and bow." Fiona's pen hovered over her notepad. Her breathing remained steady. One inhale, one exhale. In her mind, she was no longer in the air-conditioned dining room of Aurelia's. She was back in the sweltering alleys of Calabar, hiding from the loan sharks who had bled her father dry. She had spent 3 years blending into the walls, learning the street slang, the formal phrasing, the rhythm of a language that belonged to 1 billion people. She knew Hindi better than she knew French or Spanish. She knew it intimately. "Would you care for the beef carpaccio to start?" Fiona asked in English, her voice smooth, polite, entirely unaffected. "It is excellent this evening." Gallagher laughed outright. It was a cold, humorless sound. "She has no idea," Gallagher said in English, glancing at Wyatt and Cole, who were grinning despite not understanding a word of the foreign exchange. Gallagher switched back to Hindi, staring directly into Fiona's face. मुझे लगता है ये इतनी सस्ती है कि इसे खरीदने में सिर्फ चंद सिक्के लगेंगे, he told his men. I think she is so cheap, it would only take a few coins to buy her. He leaned back, assessing her like a piece of livestock at an auction. तुम्हारी कोई औकात नहीं है. तुम सिर्फ हमारा कचरा उठाने के लिए हो. You have no worth. You are only here to pick up our trash. The cruelty wasn't about the words themselves. It was about the power. Gallagher was a man who exerted dominance in every room he entered. He couldn't beat a waitress in a Michelin star restaurant. He couldn't shoot her. But he could strip away her humanity right in front of her face, confident in his absolute superiority, reveling in the fact that she was forced to stand there, smiling politely, completely ignorant of her own degradation. Or so he thought. And a bottle of the Cabernet? Fiona asked. Yes. Gallagher switched back to English, waving his hand dismissively. The 14, and bring some bread. Quickly. Right away, sir. Fiona turned on her heel and walked away. Her spine was steel. Her hands didn't shake until she pushed through the kitchen doors and stood in the chaotic safety of the prep alley. She leaned against the stainless steel counter, closing her eyes. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. You good, Hayes? The sous chef muttered, not looking up from a pan of searing scallops. Fine, Fiona breathed. She wasn't fine. The anger was a slow, toxic burn in her gut. She had spent years swallowing her pride. She had let customers snap their fingers at her, let them yell at her over undercooked steaks, let them leave their phone numbers on receipts with pathetic winks. It was part of the job. You put on the apron, you check your ego at the door. But this was different. Gallagher wasn't just being a demanding customer. He was using a language she had bled for, a language she associated with survival trauma, and a hard-won resilience to turn her into an object of ridicule for his own twisted entertainment. He was hiding behind a linguistic wall to spit in her face. Fiona picked up the bottle of 2014 Cabernet. She grabbed the corkscrew. She could just ignore it. That was the smart play. Let the Mafia boss have his joke. Let him feel like a god among insects. Keep her head down, collect her tip, and pay her rent. Survival over pride. It had been her motto for 5 years. But as she walked back out into the dining room, looking at the corner booth where Gallagher was currently laughing at something, Gideon said, the anger crystallized. It stopped being a messy, hot emotion and turned into something cold. Sharp. She approached the table. तुम्हारी हिम्मत कैसे हुई मुझे इतनी देर इंतजार करवाने की बेवकूफ लड़की? Gallagher muttered in Hindi as she approached with the wine. How dare you make me wait this long, stupid girl? He wasn't even trying to hide his sneer now. He was fully enjoying the game. Fiona set the glasses down. She presented the bottle to Gallagher. He nodded without looking at the label. She cut the foil, her hands moving with practiced mechanical grace. She drove the corkscrew in. Dekho iske haath, Gallagher murmured to Gideon in Hindi. Look at her hands. मजदूरों वाले हाथ. मैं इसे एक रात के लिए खरीद सकता हूं और ये खुशी खुशी मेरे जूते साफ करेगी. Laborer's hands. I could buy her for a night, and she would happily clean my shoes. Gideon laughed. Cole smirked, sensing the insult, even if he didn't know the words. Fiona pulled the cork. It popped with a quiet, satisfying thwack. She poured a tasting amount into Gallagher's glass. He picked it up, swirled it, tasted it, and gave a sharp nod. Fiona moved around the table, pouring for the other 3 men. When you're done pouring, Gallagher said in English, his tone dripping with utter condescension, clean up those breadcrumbs. You missed a spot. Try to be useful. Fiona finished pouring Gideon's glass. She placed the bottle exactly in the center of the table, perfectly aligned with the salt and pepper shakers. She stood up straight. She looked at the breadcrumbs. Then, for the first time all evening, she broke protocol. She looked Arthur Gallagher directly in the eyes. The dining room around them was a low hum of clinking silver and soft jazz, but at table 4, the air suddenly went dead. When a server looks a man like Arthur Gallagher in the eye, holding his gaze without a trace of deference, it registers as an act of physical aggression. Wyatt stiffened. Cole's hand casually dropped beneath the tablecloth, resting near his waistband. Gallagher's eyes narrowed. The faint mocking smile faded from his lips, replaced by a cold, reptilian stillness. He wasn't used to being looked at like a peer. He certainly wasn't used to being looked at with pity. Fiona didn't blink. She held his gaze, feeling the massive weight of the danger radiating from the men around the table. Her heart was beating frantically, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was as smooth and unbothered as glass. "Mujhe aapke joote saaf karne ka koi shauq nahi hai, Mr. Gallagher," Fiona said. Her pronunciation was flawless. No clipped foreign vowels, just the heavy, authentic cadence of a local. "I have no interest in cleaning your shoes, Mr. Gallagher." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the corner booth. Gideon froze his wine glass halfway to his mouth. Wyatt and Cole exchanged a sharp, confused look, snapping to attention, sensing the massive shift in the atmosphere, even without understanding the language. Gallagher sat completely paralyzed. For 3 agonizing seconds, his brain tried to process what he was hearing. The hollow, empty-headed waitress hadn't just spoken to him. She had spoken back to him in his own private code. Fiona didn't stop there. She leaned in just a fraction, resting one hand lightly on the back of the empty chair next to him. "और अगर आप किसी को अपनी भाषा में जालील करने का शौक रखते हैं," she continued smoothly, her tone conversational, but laced with a lethal amount of condescension, "तो कम से कम ग्रामर तो ठीक रखिए. सस्ती शब्द यहाँ ठीक नहीं बैठता. सस्ती तो आपकी सोच है. And if you are so fond of humiliating someone in your language, at least get your grammar right. The word cheap doesn't fit here. What is cheap is your mindset." Gideon choked on his wine. He coughed violently into his napkin, his eyes wide and panicked, darting between his boss and the server. Gallagher's face went through a terrifying transformation. First pale shock, then a dark, bruised flush of absolute fury. The veins in his neck stood out against his crisp white collar. He was a man who commanded empires. He did not get dressed down by women wearing aprons. "What did you just say to me?" Gallagher hissed in English. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the threat of a loaded gun. Fiona didn't flinch. She picked up her serving tray and held it against her hip. "I said," Fiona replied in English, her voice perfectly polite, loud enough only for their table to hear, "that if you are going to insult me right to my face, you should use the correct verb conjugations. Your accent is passable, Mr. Gallagher, but your sentence structure is frankly embarrassing. It sounds like you learned it from a phrase book at the airport." Cole halfway stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Boss, you want me to—" "Sit down," Gallagher snapped. He didn't look at Cole. His eyes were locked on Fiona, drilling into her, trying to find the crack in her armor, trying to find the trembling fear he was so accustomed to seeing. He found nothing, just a tired waitress with aching feet who had survived things far worse than a man in a nice suit. "Who are you?" Gallagher asked softly. The mockery was completely gone. "I am Fiona. I will be your server tonight," she said, reverting instantly to her customer service persona. She offered a small professional smile. "I'll give you a few more minutes with the menu. Let me know if you need any recommendations. The kitchen does a wonderful job with the lamb." She gave a slight customary nod of her head, turned around, and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't hurry. She walked with the measured, steady pace of a woman entirely in control of her domain. By the time she reached the kitchen doors, She could feel 4 pairs of eyes burning holes into her back. But she didn't look over her shoulder. When the kitchen door swung shut behind her, Fiona immediately sagged against the prep station. Her knees knocked together. The adrenaline crash hit her so hard she felt physically sick. She pressed the palms of her hands against her eyes, taking deep, shuddering breaths. "Jesus, Hayes," Simon whispered, appearing out of nowhere. His face was the color of old chalk. "What the hell just happened out there? Cole looked like he was about to pull a piece, and Gallagher looks like he just saw a ghost. What did you do?" "Nothing, Simon," Fiona said, forcing herself to stand up straight. "Just clarified a misunderstanding about the menu." "I told you not to look at him," Simon hissed, pulling at his collar. "Do you know who that is? If he complains to the owner, you're not just fired, you're blacklisted. Or worse. God, I have to go apologize." "He won't complain," Fiona said quietly. Simon stopped glaring at her. "How do you know that?" "Because men like Arthur Gallagher didn't complain to managers. They didn't write bad reviews. They operated in the shadows, dealing in respect, dominance, and power. To complain would be to admit that a waitress had somehow gotten under his skin. It would mean admitting defeat. "Just trust me," Fiona said, grabbing a fresh pitcher of water. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her apron. The fear was still there, buzzing under her skin, but it was overshadowed by a profound, dark sense of satisfaction. She pushed the doors open and walked back out onto the floor. At table 4, the atmosphere had completely shifted. The casual arrogance was gone. Gideon was staring intensely at the tablecloth. Wyatt and Cole sat rigidly radiating unease, and Arthur Gallagher, he wasn't talking. He was just watching her. As Fiona moved across the dining room, pouring water at table 7, clearing plates at table 9, she could feel his eyes tracking her every movement. It wasn't the predatory, dismissive stare from before. It was something much more dangerous. It was curiosity. The remainder of the evening was a master class in psychological warfare. If Arthur Gallagher was angry, he didn't show it. He ate his braised lamb with the methodical precision of a surgeon. He conversed with Gideon about freight tariffs and union disputes in a low, even murmur. He completely ignored the 2 bodyguards who sat rigidly picking at their food as if expecting it to explode. Fiona provided flawless service. She replaced their silverware between courses without making a sound. She kept the water glasses filled to exactly 3/4 capacity. She crumbed the table with a small silver blade, sweeping away the remnants of artisan bread without once brushing against a tailored sleeve. She was a ghost. She had reverted to the exact thing he had mocked her for being a piece of the background architecture. But the dynamic had irreparably shifted. Every time she reached across him to clear a plate, the silence at the table thickened. Gallagher didn't look at her, but she could feel his attention. It was a heavy physical pressure, like the air right before a thunderstorm breaks. At midnight, the dining room finally emptied. The ambient jazz track switched over to the closing playlist. Simon stood near the host stand, chewing his thumbnail to the cuticle, watching table 4, with the desperate intensity of a man waiting for a bomb squad to clear a building. Gallagher raised his hand. 2 fingers, the universal dismissive gesture for the bill. Fiona walked to the POS terminal, printed the receipt, and placed it inside a black leather booklet. She walked back to the table and set it down by Gallagher's right hand. "Take it," Gallagher said. His voice was a flat, unreadable baritone. He hadn't even looked at the total. He slid a heavy matte black credit card onto the leather. Fiona picked it up, ran it through the machine at the service station, and returned. She placed the pen next to the slip. Gallagher signed his name with a few sharp, illegible strokes. He stood up. Wyatt and Cole were on their feet, instantly adjusting their jackets, their eyes scanning the empty restaurant. Gideon wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, tossing it onto the table before following his boss. Gallagher stopped at the edge of the booth. He looked at Fiona. It was a long, clinical look. He was cataloguing her. The cheap, slip-resistant shoes, the slight fraying at the cuffs of her uniform shirt, the dark bags under her eyes that no amount of concealer could entirely hide. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out the glass front doors into the humid city night, his men forming an impenetrable wedge around him. Fiona stood still for a long time. The tension slowly drained out of her shoulders, leaving behind a dull, throbbing exhaustion. She walked over to the table to collect the leather booklet. She expected nothing. A 0 on the tip line, a petty complaint written to management. Men who were humiliated in front of their subordinates rarely let it go without extracting a pound of flesh. She opened the booklet. The bill was $1,200. The tip line was filled out. $10,000. Fiona stared at the ink. Her brain short-circuited, struggling to process the math. $10,000. It was 6 months of rent. It was groceries, electricity, and the quiet, gnawing anxiety in the pit of her stomach, completely erased in a single stroke of a pen. But it wasn't a gift. She looked closer at the merchant copy. Beneath his signature, written in small, perfectly legible script, was a single word. It wasn't in English. Aukat. Status. Worth. Fiona closed the booklet. The money wasn't an apology. It was a price tag. It was Arthur Gallagher's way of having the last word. He was telling her that no matter how good her grammar was, no matter how sharply she could cut him down in a foreign tongue, she was still someone who could be bought. She was the help, and he was the bank. She walked over to Simon, who was hovering near the bar. She handed him the booklet. Simon opened it. His eyes bulged. He looked from the receipt to Fiona, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Hayes, is this... Did he mean to write this? Process it, Fiona said flatly, pulling off her black tie and throwing it over her shoulder. I'm going home. Fiona, wait. You can't just take a 10 grand tip from a mobster and walk out. There are tax implications. There are... Process it, Simon. She repeated her voice, dropping an octave. She turned and walked toward the employee locker room. She didn't feel victorious. She felt exposed. And in the world she had grown up in, exposure was a death sentence. 3 days passed. The $10,000 cleared her bank account on a Tuesday. Fiona didn't touch a single cent of it. She paid her rent from her standard wages. She bought cheap ramen and wilted vegetables from the corner bodega. She rode the subway at 2 in the morning, clutching her pepper spray in her coat pocket, keeping her head down. She knew how blood money worked. If you spent it, you accepted the terms and conditions attached to it. If it just sat there, it was a clerical error. By Thursday, the paranoia began to fade. Gallagher hadn't returned to Aurelia's. Her life settled back into its grueling, monotonous rhythm. Wipe the tables. Smile at the rich. Ignore the ache in her knees. Sleep for 5 hours. Repeat. It was raining on Thursday night when she finished her shift. The city was slick and cold, reflecting the neon signs in the puddles along the cracked pavement. Fiona pulled her thin trench coat tighter around herself and walked down the steps into the subway station. The station was deserted, smelling sharply of ozone, stale urine, and wet garbage. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, sickly shadows against the tiled walls. Fiona stood near the edge of the platform, staring into the dark tunnel, listening for the rumble of the downtown train. It's delayed, a voice said. Fiona froze. The voice was smooth, raspy, and entirely out of place in the grime of a public transit station. She turned slowly. Gideon was standing 20 feet away, leaning casually against a structural pillar. He was wearing a dark wool overcoat and holding a black umbrella, its tip resting on the dirty concrete. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like an executive waiting for a town car. Fiona's hand drifted to her pocket, her fingers wrapping around the small plastic canister of pepper spray. It was a useless gesture against a man who probably had a suppressed firearm in his coat, but the instinct was hardwired. Track maintenance. Gideon continued stepping away from the pillar. He didn't approach her, maintaining a polite, calculated distance. The downtown line won't run for another 40 minutes. I can wait, Fiona said. Her voice was steady. You shouldn't. It's cold. And this city isn't safe for a young woman at this hour. Gideon offered a faint, humorless smile. Mr. Gallagher sent me to offer you a ride. Tell Mr. Gallagher I prefer the train. I'm afraid Mr. Gallagher doesn't accept declined invitations, Miss Hayes. He is waiting for you. Fiona looked around the empty platform. There were no cameras, no transit cops, no witnesses. If Gideon wanted to take her, he would take her. Fighting would just result in a broken jaw before she got thrown into the trunk of a car. She evaluated her options with the cold, cynical arithmetic she had learned in Mumbai. Compliance was safer than resistance, provided you kept your eyes open. Where is he? She asked. Not far. Gideon gestured toward the stairs. After you. Fiona climbed the stairs back up to the street level. A black Audi A8 was idling at the curb, its hazards blinking softly in the rain. Wyatt was behind the wheel. Gideon opened the rear door for her. Fiona slid into the back seat. The leather was pristine and smelled of expensive cedar. Gideon shut the door, got into the front passenger seat, and the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. No one spoke. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers. Fiona watched the city blur past the tinted glass. They were heading south toward the industrial district. The high-end boutiques and glowing restaurants gave way to chain-link fences, corrugated steel warehouses, and the towering silhouettes of loading cranes. The car slowed and turned through a set of open iron gates, driving onto a massive concrete pier. The black water of the harbour churned aggressively against the pilings. Stacked shipping containers formed steel canyons in the darkness, towering 4 stories high. The Audi came to a halt in front of an empty warehouse at the edge of the pier. The massive rolling door was pulled up, revealing a cavernous interior illuminated by a few harsh work lights. We're here, Gideon said, not looking back at her. Fiona opened the door and stepped out into the freezing rain. She walked into the warehouse. Arthur Gallagher was standing near the back, looking out a large broken window that faced the harbour. He was wearing a dark grey suit, his hands in his pockets. A single wooden chair sat in the middle of the empty concrete floor. He didn't turn around when her footsteps echoed through the massive space. Do you know why I bring people here? Gallagher asked. His voice bounced off the high ceiling, sounding louder than it was. To intimidate them, Fiona answered flatly. She stopped a few feet away from the wooden chair, refusing to sit in it. Sitting meant submission. Gallagher finally turned. He looked at her, his expression entirely unreadable. He stepped out of the shadows and into the harsh pool of light. To remind them, he corrected softly, walking slowly toward her. To remind them of scale. This warehouse, the ships out there, the containers, it's all commerce. It's all moving pieces. People get caught up in their own small lives, and they forget how massive the machine really is. They forget how easily a single gear can be crushed if it tries to turn backward. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something sharp and expensive like bergamot and smoke. You didn't spend the money, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't need charity, Fiona replied, keeping her eyes locked on his. It wasn't charity, it was a correction. Gallagher tilted his head, studying her face, as if trying to decipher a difficult text. You corrected my grammar. I corrected your financial situation. I consider the debt settled. There was no debt. There is always a debt, he said softly. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. He tossed it onto the wooden chair. It landed with a heavy, definitive slap. Fiona Hayes. Gallagher said, reciting the information without looking at the envelope. Born in Chicago. Mother died when you were young. Father was an independent contractor who took a job overseeing construction on a high-rise project in Mumbai in 2016. He took out loans from the wrong people to cover material shortages. He defaulted. Fiona's heart skipped a beat. The cold air in the warehouse suddenly felt suffocating. She forced her breathing to remain shallow, hiding the spike of panic. Your father disappeared in 2018. Gallagher continued, his voice devoid of pity or malice. It was just business. You were 19, left alone in a city of 20 million people with a debt you couldn't pay. You vanished into the slums. Dharavi, mostly. You worked in illegal sweatshops. You ran errands for local bookies. You survived. Fiona dug her fingernails into the palms of her hands until the skin broke. What do you want? I want to know how you got out, Gallagher said, taking a step closer. The curiosity in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, predatory intensity. People who owe money to the D Company don't just get on a plane and fly back to America. They end up in the harbor. So how did a 19-year-old white girl from Chicago negotiate her way out of a blood debt with the Indian Mafia? The wind howled through the broken window, carrying the scent of salt and diesel fuel. Fiona stared at the manila envelope on the chair. It held her entire life. Her trauma, her terror, the long nights spent, huddled in corrugated tin shacks, listening to men scream in the alleyways. Arthur Gallagher had bought her history with a few phone calls. She looked back up at him. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, familiar fury. It was the same fury she had felt at the restaurant, but sharper now, focused to a diamond point. You think you understand how the world works because you own a few ships and buy off city councilmen, Fiona said. Her voice didn't shake. It was low, hard, and laced with absolute contempt. Gallagher's jaw tightened. Excuse me. You sit in climate-controlled offices and corner booths, giving orders to men like Gideon to do your dirty work. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She was shorter than him, but she didn't look up. She forced him to look down. You think having a dossier on my life means you understand what I did to survive? I understand leverage, Gallagher said softly. You understand paper, Fiona fired back. You want to know how I got out? I didn't negotiate, Mr. Gallagher. You don't negotiate with men who view you as property. I outlasted them. I learned their language. I learned their habits. I became so invisible, so utterly useful, that they stopped seeing me as a target and started seeing me as a tool. And when the police finally raided their compound, I took the ledger that proved they were bribing the Port Authority, and I traded it to a rival boss in exchange for a passport and a plane ticket. Gallagher stared at her. The silence stretched between them, heavy and absolute. I didn't buy my way out, Fiona whispered, her eyes blazing. I burned my way out. So don't stand there and try to intimidate me with your empty warehouses and your expensive suits. You're just a man who wears a better tie than the thugs who tried to kill me. For a long moment, Gallagher didn't move. He absorbed the insult. He absorbed the absolute lack of fear radiating from her. Then slowly the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't the cruel, mocking smile he had worn in the restaurant. It was something else. A genuine, reluctant respect. You're entirely out of your mind, Gallagher murmured. I'm tired, Fiona corrected him. I'm tired of men like you thinking that money gives you the right to strip people of their dignity. Gallagher looked down at the floor, then back up at her. The cold corporate exterior seemed to fracture, just a fraction, revealing the dangerous, calculated intelligence underneath. The customs official in Mumbai, Gallagher said, abruptly changing the subject. His tone was completely businesslike. The one holding my shipping containers. He is demanding a 30% bump. You heard the conversation at the restaurant." Fiona frowned, thrown off balance by the sudden shift. "I heard. His name is Sharma. He's new. He's trying to make a point." Gallagher took a step back, giving her space. "I need to send someone to negotiate. Gideon is too well known. He's burned in Mumbai. If I send Wyatt or Cole, they'll just shoot someone, and I'll lose the cargo entirely." Fiona stared at him, a terrible suspicion forming in her gut. "No, you know the city. You know the language. More importantly, you know how these men operate." I said no. Fiona backed away. "I serve plates, Mr. Gallagher. I pour water. I am not going back to India to negotiate a bribe for a crime syndicate." "You serve plates because you're hiding," Gallagher said quietly. "You're hiding in plain sight, pretending to be a background character, wasting your life because you're terrified of being noticed again. But you couldn't help yourself at the restaurant, could you? You had to speak up. You had to correct me. You insulted me. I tested you," he corrected smoothly. "And you passed. Brilliantly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. He tossed it to her. Fiona caught it out of reflex. It was a keycard, heavy black plastic with a magnetic strip. "That's access to a suite at the St. Regis," Gallagher said. "And an expense account. You're done working at Aurelia's. The pay was abysmal anyway. I am not your employee," Fiona said, her voice rising in anger. She threw the keycard onto the wooden chair next to her file. "You aren't," Gallagher agreed calmly. "But you are uniquely qualified for a problem I currently have, and I am uniquely positioned to offer you something you desperately want. And what is that? A chance to stop hiding." Gallagher walked past her, heading toward the open bay doors. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. The harsh lights caught the grey at his temples. "You survived the wolves, Fiona, but you're still living like a sheep. Think about it. The flight leaves on Saturday." He walked out into the rain. A moment later, Fiona heard the heavy doors of the Audi slam shut and the sound of the engine fading away into the night. She stood alone in the massive warehouse. The wind whipped through the broken glass, biting through her thin coat. She looked at the manila envelope sitting on the chair, containing every nightmare she had spent 5 years trying to outrun. Beside it lay the black keycard. Arthur Gallagher hadn't brought her here to kill her. He hadn't brought her here to intimidate her into submission. He had brought her here to weaponize her. Fiona walked slowly toward the chair. She didn't pick up the envelope. She didn't need to read the contents. She had lived them. She reached out her fingers, brushing against the cold plastic of the keycard. She closed her eyes, the sounds of the harbor fading away, replaced by the phantom noise of a city 8,000 miles away. The blaring horns, the smell of the sea, the chaotic, violent pulse of a world that had tried to break her. She opened her eyes, picked up the keycard and slid it into her pocket. First-class cabins are designed to simulate an artificial womb. The air is filtered, the lighting is ambient, and the champagne flows in a continuous numbing stream. For 14 hours you are suspended above the earth, detached from consequence. Fiona stared at her reflection in the dark window of the Boeing 777. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. Gone was the stained apron, the cheap polyester slacks, and the permanent slouch of a service worker, apologizing for taking up space. In their place was a tailored charcoal blazer, an ivory silk blouse, and the sharp, unforgiving posture of someone who had a job to do. Arthur Gallagher had left nothing to chance. When Fiona arrived at the St. Regis, a wardrobe had already been curated. There were no instructions, only a leather briefcase containing a laptop, a dossier on Port Authority Chief Sharma, and a round-trip ticket to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International Airport. She took a sip of the sparkling water resting on her armrest. It tasted like ash. Every mile the plane chewed through brought her closer to the graveyard of her youth. Her chest felt tight, bound by invisible steel bands. She had spent 5 years meticulously scrubbing the scent of Mumbai from her skin. Now she was flying straight back into the furnace, financed by a man who treated human lives like line items on a balance sheet. "We will be beginning our descent shortly, Ms. Hayes," the flight attendant murmured, appearing silently beside her. Fiona nodded. "Thank you." When the wheels touched down, a physical jolt shot up her spine. She walked through customs with a diplomatic visa Arthur's people had somehow procured. No lines, no questions, just a heavy stamp on a fresh page of a new passport. The moment the sliding glass doors of the terminal opened, the city hit her. It wasn't just a location. Mumbai was a physical assault. The heat was a wet blanket thrown over her head, instantly drawing sweat to her collar. The air smelled exactly as it had in her nightmares, a chaotic, beautiful, rotting mixture of roasting spices, diesel exhaust, jasmine, and raw sewage. Ms. Hayes, a man in a crisp white linen shirt, stood by a black Mercedes SUV. He had the thick build of former military and the flat, unblinking stare of a man who got paid to solve violent problems. "I'm Caleb," he said, opening the rear door. "Mr. Gallagher's local liaison. I'll be taking you to the port." "No hotel?" Fiona asked, sliding into the air-conditioned sanctuary of the back seat. Mr. Gallagher's instructions were clear. "We handle the cargo release first, then you rest." Caleb climbed into the driver's seat and put the car in gear. The drive was a blur of neon and poverty. Fiona watched the skeletal frames of half-built skyscrapers looming over seas of blue tarp roofs. She remembered the gnawing hunger of living under those tarps. She remembered the monsoon rains washing the filth of the upper city down into the alleys. She pressed 2 fingers to her pulse point, feeling the rapid, frantic beat. "I am not a victim," she repeated the mantra in her head. "I am a weapon. Sharma is expecting Gideon." Caleb noted, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "He's not going to be happy to see you. Men like him don't do business with women. They barely do business with foreigners." "Men like him only do business with leverage," Fiona replied softly. She opened the leather briefcase and pulled out the dossier. "He's holding 30 shipping containers, agricultural machinery on paper. What's actually inside Caleb's Yahoo?" Caleb's eyes flicked away from the mirror. He stared straight ahead at the chaotic traffic. "It's better if you don't know. If I'm going to threaten a man in his own city, I need to know what I'm protecting." Fiona's voice left absolutely no room for debate. Caleb sighed, his hands tightening on the leather steering wheel. "Cobalt, unregistered. Mined out of the Congo, routed through ghost ports. If Sharma opens those crates, Arthur loses $80 million and catches federal charges in 3 different countries." Fiona closed the file. The stakes weren't just a tax bracket. They were existential. Arthur hadn't sent her because she knew the language. He had sent her because she was expendable. If she failed, Sharma would seize the cobalt, and Fiona would disappear into the Mumbai underworld, completely untraceable back to Gallagher. She wasn't a partner. She was a human shield. A cold, bitter smile touched the corner of her mouth. She had survived the slums because she knew how to play a rigged game. Arthur Gallagher thought he was using her. He was about to find out that a weapon doesn't just cut the enemy, it cuts whoever holds it carelessly. The Port Authority office wasn't a pristine government building. It was a corrugated steel structure sitting on the edge of a massive sun-baked concrete lot. Towering cranes moved like slow metallic dinosaurs against the smog-choked sky, stacking shipping containers in endless labyrinths. Caleb parked the Mercedes near the chain-link fence. He reached under his seat and pulled out a suppressed Glock 19, checking the chamber before sliding it into his waistband. You stay here. Fiona set her hand on the door handle. Caleb frowned. My orders are to protect you. Your presence communicates that we are preparing for violence. Fiona countered, her voice completely detached. Violence means we have lost control of the negotiation. If Sharma sees muscle, he will double his price out of pride. I go in alone. If you don't come out in 20 minutes, I'm coming in. If I don't come out in 20 minutes, start the car and drive to the airport, she said. She stepped out into the crushing heat. The gravel crunched under her leather soles. She walked up the metal stairs to the office, her face a mask of absolute calm. She pushed the door open. The office was an exercise in bureaucratic misery. 3 ceiling fans aggressively chopped at the humid air. Stacks of yellowing manifests covered every surface. Behind a cheap veneer desk sat Chief Inspector Sharma. He was a thick-set man in his late 50s, sporting a heavy mustache and the arrogant slump of a man who had never been told no in his own district. 2 armed guards in khaki uniforms stood by the back door, holding aging assault rifles with lazy indifference. Sharma looked up from his paperwork. He took in Fiona's tailored suit, her pale skin, and the utter lack of fear in her eyes. His lip curled into a sneer. You are lost, madam, Sharma said, in heavily accented English. The tourist district is in Colaba. This is a restricted area. Fiona walked to the wooden chair across from his desk. She didn't ask for permission. She sat down, crossed her legs, and placed the leather briefcase on her lap. I am not a tourist, Chief Inspector, Fiona said smoothly. My name is Fiona Hayes. I represent Arthur Gallagher. Sharma's eyes narrowed. He leaned back in his chair, a cruel amusement flashing across his face. Mr. Gallagher sends a little girl to do a man's work. Where is Gideon? Did he lose his stomach for the Mumbai heat? Gideon is handling secondary logistics, Fiona lied effortlessly. Mr. Gallagher felt this required a more nuanced touch. You are holding 30 of our containers. You are asking for a 30% tariff increase. It is not an ask. It is the law. Sharma spread his hands in mock innocence. Irregularities in the paperwork. I have a duty to inspect the cargo. Unless, of course, a fine is paid to expedite the administrative process. Fiona stared at him. She let the silence stretch. She let him squirm under the weight of her undivided attention. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on his desk. When she spoke, the polite English evaporated. She switched to Hindi, her accent thick with the gutter slang of Dharavi, entirely incongruous with her designer clothes. Aapko lagta hai ki aap yahan ke raja hain, Fiona said softly. You think you are the king here? Sharma recoiled as if she had slapped him. The 2 guards by the door stiffened, shifting their rifles. Fiona didn't break eye contact. लेकिन आप सिर्फ एक और रिश्वतखोर अफसर हैं जो अपनी औकात भूल गया है. But you are just another corrupt officer who has forgotten his place. तुम्हारी हिम्मत कैसे हुई? Sharma sputtered, his face turning a deep mottled red. How dare you? Chup kama. Fiona snapped the word like a whip. Quiet. It was a command born of the streets, devoid of any corporate politeness. Sharma actually clamped his mouth shut, stunned by the sheer venom in her tone. You want 30%. Fiona switched seamlessly back to English, maintaining her aggressive forward posture. You want 30% of $80 million of unregistered cobalt. Do you even know who you are trying to extort? Sharma recovered his bravado, slamming his fist on the desk. I don't care about Gallagher's money. This is my port. I will open those crates right now and call the federal police. Do it, Fiona said, gesturing to the phone on his desk. Call them. Sharma hesitated, his hand hovering over the receiver. You won't, Fiona whispered, a dark, cynical smile playing on her lips. Because if you call the federal police, they confiscate the cobalt. You get a pat on the back and a small bonus in your pension. But if you seize the shipment, You make an enemy of Arthur Gallagher. And Gallagher doesn't sue people, Sharma. He erases them." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the desk. "That is a routing number for an offshore account in the Cayman Islands," Fiona explained. "Mr. Gallagher is not paying a 30% tariff. He is paying you a flat fee of $1 million. In exchange, you will release the containers within the hour. You will also guarantee safe passage for all future shipments." Sharma looked at the paper, then laughed a harsh, grating sound. $1 million for a blind eye on 80 million. You are crazy, little girl. 30% or I open the boxes. Fiona stood up. She smoothed the front of her blazer. "Tumhare bhai ki dukaan hai, na Baikula mein?" Fiona asked in Hindi. Her voice was ice. "Your brother has a shop right in Baikula." Sharma stopped laughing. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly grey. "Aur tumhari beti," Fiona continued relentlessly methodically, reciting the details she had spent the entire flight extracting from Arthur's intelligence files. "London School of Economics में पढ़ती है. उसकी tuition fees तुम्हारी सरकारी तनख्वाह से तो नहीं आती. And your daughter. She studies at the London School of Economics. Her tuition fees don't come from your government salary. Are you threatening my family?" Sharma hissed his hand, dropping toward the drawer of his desk. "I am explaining leverage," Fiona replied coldly, echoing Arthur's words from the warehouse. "You want to play the extortion game, Chief Inspector? Let's play. If those containers are not released in 1 hour, the D Company will receive a very detailed ledger of your side deals with the Russian syndicates. The local cartels don't take kindly to government officials taxing their rivals, but letting the Russians slide for a cut." Sharma stared at her. He was looking at a ghost. He was looking at a woman who knew the exact pressure points of his corrupt, precarious life. "You think Gallagher's money protects you here?" Sharma whispered, terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. "I don't need Gallagher's money to destroy you." Fiona leaned down until her face was inches from his. "I survived the D Company when I was a teenager with nothing but the clothes on my back. Now I have a blank check and a very long memory. Take the $1 million, Sharma, or lose everything." She tapped her fingernail against the piece of paper containing the routing number. She turned her back to him, a calculated display of absolute disrespect, and walked toward the door. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Her spine tingled, anticipating a bullet. But she forced herself to walk slowly, pushing open the rusted door and stepping back out into the blinding sunlight. She walked down the metal stairs. Caleb was standing by the Mercedes, his hand resting inside his jacket. Fiona opened the passenger door and got in. She didn't say a word. She just stared straight ahead, her chest rising and falling in shallow, controlled breaths. 2 minutes later, Caleb's encrypted radio buzzed. He picked it up, listened for 5 seconds, and set it down. He looked at Fiona, his expression a mix of shock and profound wariness. "The cranes are moving," Caleb said quietly. "The shipment is released." "Take me to the airport," Fiona replied, closing her eyes. "I'm going home." New York was raining when Fiona returned. It was a cold, driving rain that washed the streets clean and smelled of wet asphalt and ozone. She didn't go to her apartment. She didn't return to the St. Regis. She took a cab directly to the financial district. Gallagher Holdings occupied the top 3 floors of a glass and steel monolith overlooking the East River. It was a fortress of silent wealth. The floors were Italian marble, the receptionists spoke in hushed tones, and the security detail wore earpieces and suits that cost more than Fiona's yearly salary at Aurelia's. She walked past the reception desk. The guard moved to intercept her, but Gideon stepped out of an adjacent hallway, raising a hand. The guard stepped back instantly. Gideon looked at Fiona. His eyes traced the exhausted lines around her mouth, the sharp, uncompromising set of her shoulders. He didn't offer a patronizing smile. He just nodded. "He's in his office," Gideon said. Fiona walked down the corridor. At the end, a set of double oak doors stood slightly ajar. She pushed them open without knocking. Arthur Gallagher was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a tumbler of amber liquid. The city sprawled out beneath him, a grid of lights blurred by the rain. The office was vast, decorated in shades of slate and mahogany, exuding the same cold, calculated power as the man who inhabited it. He didn't turn around when she entered. "Caleb sent the confirmation," Arthur said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "The cobalt is on the water. Sharma took the $1 million and guaranteed the route." Fiona walked to his massive teak desk. She unclasped the leather briefcase and let it drop onto the polished wood with a loud, irreverent thud. "He took the $1 million because I threatened to hand him over to the local cartels," Fiona said flatly. Arthur finally turned. He took a sip of his scotch, his slate-grey eyes locking onto hers. "I don't care how you did it. I care that it's done. You proved my theory, Fiona. You are incredibly effective when you stop pretending to be invisible." "You set me up." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "I gave you an opportunity. You sent me into a room with a man holding $80 million of illegal leverage, knowing that if I failed, I would take the fall." Fiona stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. She wasn't an employee anymore. She had crossed the threshold. "You didn't give me an opportunity. You used me as a localized explosive. If it blew up in my face, your hands were clean." Arthur didn't back away. He set his glass down on a side table. "Welcome to the real world. Everyone is a tool. The only difference is who holds the handle." "I am not a tool," Fiona said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, steady rhythm. "I am the reason you didn't lose your empire today." The air between them crackled. It was the same tension from the restaurant, the same collision of wills from the warehouse, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Arthur was looking at her, really looking at her, and for the first time, he wasn't looking down. He saw the ruthless pragmatism she had forged in the slums. He saw the cold, cynical intelligence that matched his own, and beneath it all he saw a fire that refused to be extinguished. "What do you want, Fiona?" Arthur asked softly. The question wasn't a dismissal, it was a negotiation. "I want 10%. Arthur let out a breath that sounded remarkably like a laugh. 10% of the cobalt shipment. That's $8 million. For a single afternoon of work, it's $8 million for saving your life." Fiona corrected, her eyes burning into his. "Sharma was going to call the Federals. You were exposed. I closed the gap. 10%. And I don't pour coffee ever again." Arthur studied her face. The audacity of her demand was staggering. A waitress from a mid-tier fine dining restaurant walking into his office and demanding a multi-million-dollar cut of an international smuggling operation. It was insane. It was also completely justified. He took a step closer. The physical proximity was heavy, charged with an undeniable magnetic pull. They were two predators circling the same kill, realizing they were the only ones in the room who spoke the same language. "You think you can handle this life?" Arthur murmured, his voice dropping an octave, the scent of bergamot and scotch enveloping her. "You think you can swim in this water without drowning?" "I've been drowning since I was 19. Arthur, Fiona whispered, refusing to break his gaze, using his first name as a deliberate claim to equality. "I'm tired of treading water. I want the ship." Arthur Gallagher smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was a terrifying, genuine expression of dark approval. He reached out his knuckles lightly, brushing against the silk of her lapel, a gesture that was half threat, half promise. 10%, Arthur agreed quietly, "and a desk outside my office. You start on Monday. Do not be late." Fiona held his gaze for a second longer, establishing the absolute certainty that she had won. She didn't say thank you. She just turned around and walked out of the office, leaving the briefcase on his desk. She stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut, cutting off the view of the empire she had just carved a piece out of. As the car plummeted toward the street, Fiona looked at her reflection in the mirrored doors. The tired waitress was dead. The frightened girl hiding in the slums was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. Wow, what a massive shift in power. Fiona went from surviving in the shadows to demanding a seat at the table with one of the most dangerous men in the city. Their chemistry is absolutely electric, and you know this new partnership is going to be explosive. If you are hooked on this dark, gritty romance and want to see how Fiona handles her new life as Arthur's equal, please hit that like button. Share this story with anyone who loves a brilliant, fearless protagonist. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode of this intense Mafia drama.